first novel was published with Knopf, edited by Gary Fisketjon. I spent the past many years working on this novel and couldn't quite find a home for it. This past December, after sending it out to about everywhere my agent and I could think of, and getting this 2-part reply, which was 1, we love it, 2, we cannot, will not publish it, I thought, holy shit, they're just not publishing books they like anymore. It's a crazy business model. But that's what it was. So I sent an email to Gary and basically saying help, and Gary wrote back. And and we started talking about this idea of County Highway and this idea of Pan America, and only someone like Gary could make something like this a reality of such quality, because he'd started one of America's great trade paperback imprints before, which is Vintage Contemporaries, and it was just an idea half a year ago, right? There was no imprint, there was no contract, there was no typeface. These are the hardest working people that I've ever met in my life, and they have fun while they're doing it. It's crazy and it's amazing. It's been so much fun. Hard work and also fun to be on this tour. And this is my last night on it, so it's a real pleasure to read with everyone. And after such an unpredictable, difficult time, you know, as we say in Tennessee, God works in mysterious ways. And sometimes it's good that it doesn't land at that right place, and you have to go through the darkness to get to the light. And here we are with the inaugural Pan America book. This novel is my second novel. It's Pan America's first book, and it couldn't have been the more perfect place. Thank you for trusting me and taking me on.
Well, it's just a good book. I
mean, all right.
That's a good thing. I don't trust.
Right.
Show everybody the beautiful.
Yeah. So this like I said, I'm from Middle Tennessee, and this novel takes place right there along the Cumberland River, and this book is just a beautiful object, and even these French flaps, the interior French flaps, have this old navigation map of the river that you can study from afar here, but you can study it close up once you buy your own copy. And I'd be happy to sign it afterward and show you where on the map all the best largemouth bass fishing is, so we can go through all of that. I'm going to read just a little bit of chapter 1 for you, and after that I think we'd be happy to take questions about the process of editing, publishing, and everything else we're doing. So this is chapter 1 from Bloodline. The headwaters of this river come from forks leaking westward out of the Appalachians. They join in the foothills like estranged brothers and are then fed by countless and nameless tributaries, dribbling from porous slabs of Kentucky limestone to form the Cumberland, which widens and deepens and continues snaking westward, twisting and falling through the rolling region and finally dropping down into Tennessee, where it spills through the concrete walls of the Cordell Hole Dam, the tailwaters bending around and meeting up with the Caney Fork, a cold north-flowing river in the town of Carthage, the county seat of Smith County, near where the father now waits for what's his. Ain't much opportunity in this world for boys like you, he says. His youngest son is on the passenger side bucket seat beside him, wearing a grocery bag for a diaper, listening. They all slept here in the van last night beneath a line of hackberry trees. Now it's near dawn and the sky has the color of a bruise. Some kind of sticky insect shit lacquers the windshield. The side door slid open to the woods and the father can see his wife standing out there, half vanished in the morning mist, showing the older brother where to take a piss. Careful, she says, Out on the cattle fence, honey. We don't need no electric lemonade, the father calls. He's doing fine, she says. When the baby crunches up his face for a cry, the father says, you got your mama's sense of humor. You know that. Everything they own is packed into the van, and bumper stickers cover the rear windows to keep folks from spying in. The father's shirt bears an image of the old battle flag, peeking from his low-button flannel. He turns the ignition to battery mode, and the digital clock blinks 7 a.m. The gas gauge marks low, but that could be the incline they're parked at. He jogs the radio for some talk he can relate to, but this close to Nashville, it's all happy shit that isn't telling the truth. Everybody's singing zippity-doo-dah, oblivious to what surrounds them. The sawmill hadn't hired him yet. That's because he didn't have time to apply. He was selling used cars up in Lexington, where he was born and hardly raised, at an auction lot called Mega Motors, when one afternoon, was it just yesterday, his boss accused him of having memory problems, leaving keys in car ignitions, not calling customers back, stuff like that. The father explained that his condition had an official medical term, thank you very much. It was called far-memoried, kind of like far-sighted, but pertaining to memory. And one of the symptoms was that historical events, especially those of the heroic and violent variety, were constantly bumping up against his present day, so much so that it was difficult for him to hold on to the more recent things that didn't matter much anyway. This job, for example. The hell are you talking about? His boss said. Wait right there and I'll show you. The father walked back into the cinder block office, punched a code into the little safety deposit box, which opened on oiled hinges, and grabbed a zipped-up bank bag full of cash. He came out the front, waving it at his boss. He got into his van. Daring the fucker to even think about getting the law involved. Every damn lot in that car was illegal to some degree. Fake titles manipulated odometers, and the father knew this because he'd done much of the rigging himself on his boss's orders. While driving home, he counted the bills between his legs, with the windows rolled up so the money wouldn't fly away. Didn't amount to much, but it was enough for leaving. When he got back into their place, a small unit on the county line with a dirt circle around a tree in the front yard from where the dog used to be tied up, he found his wife on the couch staring at a muted TV. He could smell she was stoned. The boys were sleeping on the floor. Pack our shit, he said. He called around about who might be hiring and made some plans. That evening they abandoned their rental, drove west and hit 65 south. A hook moon reeled in the night as they followed the taillights down into Tennessee. They got off the interstate, followed some back roads, and he began listing his reasons for leaving, though she hadn't asked. He told her what his boss had told him, offered his thoughts on all that, and said his memory problem wasn't really a problem at all, don't you think? She didn't answer because she didn't know where she stood on that. Sometimes it seemed his memory was slipping. Other times he recalled events long before he was even born, so vividly that it seemed like he'd been right there to see them. The truth was, though, that facts weren't of much concern to him. If they didn't align with his mythical reality, they simply didn't exist. She knew the stories he told were ones he chose to justify his purpose and place in this steaming red corner of the country. So she kept quiet and let him ramble. My far memory's a natural gift from God, he said. That's what it is. I can see the past in us here right now. God hath done made it so. She looked back to make sure the boys were still asleep. Plus, I like the idea of living along the Cumberland, he said, near Beasley's Bend. That was my family's escape route. His mother had told him the same story when he was little. Though when he taught himself to read and did a little research, he discovered that his only traceable ancestral past on his father's side stretched in the opposite direction. Not down into Dixie, but up north on the border of New York and Canada, where those old people trapped beavers for pelts. But even that wasn't the whole truth. According to his mother, his father was hardly his father, just a man who'd come down to Kentucky to paint barn exteriors, and once the work dried up, found himself stuck. One evening while getting supper at the gas station, he met a woman who needed a ride. When he asked where she was going, she said, "Anywhere." So he took her back to his shack, and that's where she gave birth to Winston, on the pull-out sofa, only 5 months later. The father ignored the math, pretending the baby was his, but the mother liked to remind little Winston of the mystery. He had a daddy someplace else whose past was glorious. Growing up, he had no bathroom, not even an outhouse, just piles of empty paint cans everywhere, which the family used to take their crap out of the house and down into the creek. Once he got old enough to understand this wasn't what paint cans were made for, he asked his father about it. When the old man didn't answer, his mother told him that his line ran deeper than beaver trappers and paint cans, that he was of valorously noble blood, that his father was somewhere else entirely, that if history had turned out differently, nobody would be shitting in paint cans. They'd be living the good life, right where they belonged, back on the land his real daddy's people had escaped from. His mother took him to read about their history on a plaque at the base of an equestrian statue on the courthouse lawn of Cheapside Park in historic downtown Lexington, where he ran a forefinger of the stamped bronze letters, and above those words the old colonel, John Hunt Morgan, straight-backed, arms at his sides, was mounted atop his horse, Black Bess, from a legendary line of bluegrass saddle stock. "That's who we're from," she said. They often returned to visit the monument. He was just old enough, 9 or 10, for these trips to shape his romantic sense of history and heroism and who he was. Later, his autodidactic research provided no hint of his mother's claim to this lineage, but he needed it to be true so badly, felt it in his bones so deeply, that he decided it couldn't be false, had to be correct. And just like that, he began believing he really did have blood in the game. After visiting that statue, in bed he could hear the hooves pounding down the street like the tapping fingers of some impatient god. And he still can. Thank you so much. I got my usual stuff I go into, but I'm happy to just talk about this book a little bit, and any questions that might. We're covering a lot of ground here. It's hard to interpret your own work, so but that was a beautiful way and a totally exact way of a correct way of describing what's going on. This inability to see the difference between a problematic character and a problematic book and a problematic author, right? I mean, what you just described is like the heart of like Shakespeare, right? The negative capability, like this kind of like these characters aren't representing much else other than themselves and their humanness, which is extremely complicated, especially with someone like Winston, who we just met a little bit of, and
Tell people what Winston goes on to do over the course of this book.
Yeah, so he just arrived to this mill, right? And his plan is to take that mill or get something from it. In order to do this, he gets a job there, and he quickly cuts off his own hand. And he then gets an overlarge rubber prosthesis while he's healing, and kind of teaches himself to auctioneer. He starts his own junk auctioneer thing. He becomes a local celebrity. He begins communicating and auctioneering through a bullhorn. These scenes were a lot of fun to write. They were actually the only things that Gary didn't edit much, was when Winston takes up the bullhorn and speaks. I think I just got it right somehow. Gary said, "I ain't touching that."
It's the soul of the character.
Not only does he speak through a bullhorn outside to large crowds of people, but he speaks inside to his wife and his child during dinner. That's the kind of person he is. He is delusionally obsessed with Confederate mythology. He at certain points believes he is a general, or perhaps fighting a battle. Certainly that is in himself and in his head, but also maybe he's bringing upon other people. And in doing this, he drives people a little bit crazy and eventually pushes someone over the line. And so that's who Winston is. And why did I choose to make him the center of this book? I don't know. I mean, he emerged slowly, but there is that, like, he is the gasoline for this thing, right? He is the fuel. There would be no story without him.
Is he heroic in any way?
I'm not going to interpret it, but you go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's heroic because he makes something out of nothing. Now, the thing he makes is profoundly misshapen and injurious to others, and a malformation of the human energy and form as represented by his own form, right? But is he not admirable? He is admirable, kind of.
This is what I wanted to do with Winston. Is, I mean, I love taking a character that's as kind of wild and dangerous as he is, and having them speak some of the truest things in the book. It's a very complex knot that you can't take apart. But I think you're right. I mean, this is not a book. This is not a handbook on, like, how to be, like, how to live. This is not
Handsome Winston with his roguish air was irresistible to all the ladies.
It's a chilling warning about the absurdity of demagoguery in some ways. And
the sense of the sense of mythology and self-pity and the toxicity of it. It's funny that there's a story I heard once about the band and the song, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Now, if you're a fan of Bob Dylan and the mythology of the band, there's something about that song, which is a brilliant song, but there's something about that song that always has to bother you, right? Which is, here is a band that was so canny in some ways about summoning a mythology that it knew was fake, that was invented, right? Bob Dylan didn't write folk songs. He wrote Bob Dylan songs. He stopped singing folk songs. That was the scandal of Bob Dylan. He made up in America and then made up a voice in which to sing songs about it. And they ring true to us because of the genius of the world that he created, not because it's documents real world historical events. And it's when Dylan tried to do that that the music is often, the songwriting is the thinnest. But the band played obviously this key role in that mythology as his, collaborators and Big Pink and blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows the tale. So where did they suddenly come off writing this anthem of the Old South that seems completely uncritical? Especially since most of the members of the band are from fucking Canada, right? So why is there all this nostalgia for the night they drove old Dixie down? And I always wondered about this, and I had a friend who knew Robbie Robertson and told me the answer to this story. It was fascinating. which was that Robbie Robertson, who was half Jewish, half Indian guy from Canada, was fascinated with Levon Helm, who was from the South. And he spent a month living with Levon's family on their family home. And Levon's dad had these stories, which were very much like Winston's stories that he would tell. And Levon hated them. Robbie Robertson, who was completely from outside the South, loved these stories and took them and used them to write The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Levon Helm hated the song, but Robbie made him sing it because he said, you can sing it better than anybody else can. And in fact, he could. And in fact, he only sang it once. Actually, twice. He sang it in the band movie and he sang it on the album. But he refused to sing it any other time. And part of the thing that makes it so good is that there's anguish in his voice when he sings it. But the anguish, it turns out, was being made to repeat his father's stupid stories about the Confederacy and glorify them because he thought that the stories were shit. And Robbie Robertson made him sing it anyway. And that's why Levon hated Robbie Robertson. And this is a true story from a band fanatic person who knew Robbie Robertson, but it's very twisted, and I never understood the story fully until I read your book. And suddenly I was like, right, there's a whole world of people growing up with this mythology that they're fed, that they use as a basis for their own self-worth, and it does give them something, but it's also usually a lie.
Yeah.
And
Man, that's a brilliant interpretation on the spot. And telling Winston's stories is definitely Levon Helm singing that song. Never thought about it, but that's really, because, yeah, when I was young, growing up in Tennessee, if you told me I was going to write a novel about a character who is tied so fiercely to Southern Confederate mythology, I would not have been happy to hear that. I didn't like driving down the road past 50 Confederate flags or more on the way to school. I didn't like it. But that was the case. And then as I got older, I still don't like it. But I think that in order to make this novel live on the page, I had to go back to some of those things and twist them up into these knots that are bound so tightly you can't untie them, right? That's how art is made. Like what you just explained, that's an amazing process of, oh, this is the story, but we've got to deliver it through this voice, which is going to complicate the matter. And then after the matter is complicated, we're going to deliver it through this other medium, and boom, you have a piece of art that's incredibly rich, right? You can, because of that complex process of approach and treatment and then delivery, you have something that can just be analyzed, and it's going to go deeper and deeper and deeper and basically just say something about humanity, humans, storytelling. Yeah, when we lose things, we start telling stories about them, and that's where a certain sort of mythological ghost comes from. But as you were noting earlier today, John, there's also there's a history of around where we're from of humans dressing up like ghosts, and that's called the Klan, right? So there are mythological ghosts, there are literal ghosts, and there is a land that is soaked in blood from what happened on the Civil War end of things, all the way back to the expulsion of Cherokees. That's that's the Trail of Tears. So that little spot on the Cumberland River where I'm from has a lot of ghosts, but I think it does come back to the idea of like when you lose something, you start telling stories about it, and those stories begin to shape and shape and shape.
I just wanted to share in conclusion a couplet from Herman Melville. And Herman Melville is, of course, known as the author of Moby Dick, and then Confidence Man, Bartleby the Scrivener, blah, 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 as a novelist. But of course, Melville spent his later decades as a poet, writing great reams of poetry that was ignored. You know, Moby Dick was ignored for 70 years after it was published. Melville's poetry was then ignored for another 70 or 80 years after everybody rediscovered Moby Dick, and still largely is unread. But some of it's amazing. And there was a couplet that was passed on to me by a guy who taught me a lot about writing named David Milch, the TV writer who wrote Deadwood in NYPD Blue. And this was David's favorite set of instructions about writing. And he said basically, everything you need to know about good writing is sort of contained in this one Melville couplet. So I thought I'd offer it to all of you as a parting gift. It goes like this. He says, I know a wind in purpose strong, it spins against the way it drives. And that's what good writing does. It spins against the way it drives in the context of having a purpose strong. And that's why the character's so good.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Go get you a copy. I'm happy to sign.